And I'm like freaking out. I'm like, oh, I got to convince my parents. That was kind of my first exposure to what real Counter-Strike played like. That was like opportunity of a lifetime. I put in so much work for that event. The lead up to the event was like the most stressful week of my life. When I went to press the buttons on my stream deck, I was shaking. The first map of a major, everyone kind of freaks out a bit. It was so much pressure. The crowd was the loudest I've ever heard.
This is In Retrospect with MC, aka Michael Campagna, who is a Ingame Director and Broadcast Developer at ESL. But I would also say that you're a Counter-Strike GOAT. And a lot of people probably don't know who you are. So the title of this episode is The Counter-Strike GOAT That No One Knows. And I think the reason for that will become clear, obviously, as we go through this interview, in that, when we're talking about amazing people that have done really awesome things when it comes to Counter-Strike Global Offensive in particular. Obviously, we talk about, we talk about players, we talk about Simple, Zywoo, Nico, these kinds of guys. Everyone knows those kinds of people. And everyone knows, famous talent like Sponge Machine, Henry G, Sadicus, and Assembler, these kinds of guys that have kind of made their mark on the scene. But people don't really know the people behind the scenes. And I think as far as you're concerned and as far as your role is concerned, as what initially was an observer, and now obviously you do some sort of more in-depth kind of stuff. You are one of the best in the world at what you do, and it's a very sort of unique set of skills that, again, doesn't really get highlighted all that much. So maybe for the people that are interested, this is going to be something that, they're going to be able to learn a little bit about you and what you do, and why I think a lot of people, especially in ANZ, kind of consider you to be really impressive. I think, if we talk about domestically speaking, you're quite renowned for your prospects and prowess, but globally, people probably don't really know who you are. So let's talk about MC. What is it, do you think, that made you quite, impressive in this position, so to speak, right? What was it that made the difference between, someone coming from ANZ who doesn't really make it, which is all too familiar for the majority, compared to someone like you? Because it's kind of like one of the hardest places, I would argue, to kind of make this kind of dream or career or a reality to come from.
Yeah. Thanks, Jordan, for the kind words. I think it's really just down to unique skill set and mixture of skills. So having the high level game knowledge and being able to combine it with programming knowledge to be able to not just focus on the storytelling, but improve the storytelling aspect through various broadcast integrations. I think that's the key part. So it's just I think the three key areas: the broadcast side, the game side, and the programming side. No one really has all those three aspects. So I think that's what kind of sets me apart. So it's just, I'm just a very driven individual, high achiever. So just being able to put a lot of effort into all those three areas. I think that's
what made the difference.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll be able to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of all of those, because we're going to go through your career and how you got to this point. And I think where we want to kind of start things off, obviously, is, Counter-Strike is your main game, though you have done quite a variety of titles in your career, particularly domestically. But I think it's obviously prudent to start with you getting involved in Counter-Strike and how that kind of happened. So what was it that drew you to competing in the first place? Because I remember you were like a literal child when you started kind of getting involved in this world, right? Like you were still in high school. I don't know when did you actually start playing? So like 14 or something? Yeah,
so I got the game the first day it was released, after the beta. First day it was released after the beta. I convinced my dad to let me buy it. And then I was drawn to the game because, I don't know, I was kind of, Call of Duty was a bit too easy. I wanted something a bit more difficult. Yeah. So, yes, but for the first year, I was pretty much only playing casual game modes. Jailbreak in particular was a big one, and then essentially ended up making a team with some friends from the Jailbreak community. I would have been super young then, 15. Yeah. So it was just, I remember we played at a scrim, and the very first scrim, it was so exciting. Just we ended up beating some other CGO team, and I'm like, oh wait, do we get points for this or whatnot? And they're like, oh nah, there's this website called Cybergamer. You got to play the ladder, and then you play official matches. Yep. And then I was drawn to it just immediately. Just being able to compete and learn. So at the start, it was just a bit of fun.
Yeah.
and then being able to watch the pro tournaments, like watch people like Sponge, like
Foxy and stuff.
Yeah. Wake up at like 2 a.m. To watch them play IEM and whatnot. Just ended up growing a really like great appreciation for the game. So it's just
one thing leads to another.
Yes,
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I actually wanted to ask you because obviously you started this career that you're currently in kind of almost as a player, right? Where your first sort of toes dipped into esports was as a player. So was the initial goal or dream, not even goal, maybe necessarily more so dream, to be like you watch these pro players and you said like that's what I want to be? Yeah,
pretty much. So I knew I was I knew I could be smart enough to kind of do it. Obviously back then I was like very bad at the game, and it takes a lot of time to grow, and especially when it's like CS:GO is like my first Counter-Strike, and then everyone versing has played Source and 1.6 for years. So it was more just the learning aspect. At the start, it wasn't so much I wanted to be like pro gamer. Like it was more just
you just enjoyed the process.
I enjoyed the learning process. I felt I just liked kind of growing and speaking to new people. It was kind of like attending these local LANs as like social events was pretty awesome.
Rest in peace local LANs. Unfortunately they don't really exist anymore, but hey, maybe next year there'll be, I don't know, I've heard rumors and stuff that Bris Vegas is still popping around, so there's that. But now, obviously, as we go through your career, I think the vast majority of the focus here is going to be on like your observing role and your, what you've been doing at that point, because that's kind of where you've like really defined yourself and kind of made a name for yourself. But there are a couple of instances where we'll talk about you as a player and that kind of thing. But before we sort of get into those, and I think the more impressive moments with your playing career come a little bit later than actually where you started observing. So I kind of want to follow that timeline. I want to start with almost where you. Hello, Nox. I want to start with where you actually started your journey as an observer, and because I can imagine it wasn't even something that you necessarily really thought that much about at the time. So it was ACL Sydney 2015, which was the first event that you actually worked at, and you were like observing and server adminning and stuff like that there. So how did you end up like landing that role? Because like, let's be real, if we would take a look back at your career, that's the spot where you would say, okay, that kind of started it, if that makes sense, because that's where you meet the people that went on to work at ESL, and you started doing the role that you ended up doing at ESL, and so on and so forth. You can kind of follow from there, but that's the point where it starts. Yeah,
that event was awesome. It's a pretty funny story. So I was still like playing like around Division 2 level, and I was playing against Kameen, who ended up becoming a project manager at ESL. And he was working this ACL event. And there was this scrim finder called Unity, and I just offered to help out with some like bug reports, and he was working on that project, so he kind of knew me. And then so then when he was organizing the ACL Sydney event, he needed someone to do server admin, and he knew I kind of liked that kind of technical aspect of the game. So and it was all volunteer. So the agreement was he'd write me a nice letter
reference or something.
So but that was fantastic. So it was over at Macquarie Uni. So the first day, so the day of setup was just all server admin. We were doing like cool new stuff, like being able to put the flag and the logos up the top of the scoreboard. So simpler times. And then, but then on the first day of the event, he's like, "Oh, you should spectate the games." So,
because we were using Auto Director, I think back then. Because I remember casting these kinds of events, and half the time it was like an Auto Director, or half the time it was like maybe one of the casters that wasn't casting, or you just have like some random Joe Blow who was like just at the events, like, "Hey, do you want to observe?" It's like, okay, I guess.
So it was. Because Kameen didn't want to do the Auto Director. I want to make it a bit of a better experience. So I observed the whole first day, and then the second day I was focused on the server admin. But observing was, it was just so surreal. Like it was like, the first event, Renegades, the new org, and just like all these pro players who like, I would compete against online, but I was never, like at their kind of skill level. But just made some static cameras around the map, but it was all just a bit of fun. Didn't really think too much about this could be like a career. Like back then, the notion of an observer didn't really exist. It was more just I don't know, whatever kind of spectating you're able to do,
exactly.
is good enough.
It was just like someone there, maybe that was good, and if not, auto director, then that was fine. Okay, we'll quickly sort of skip past that one because obviously that was an event that kind of led to multiple other things. One of the sort of small touching points I wanted to quickly mention was that you competed in the Crown 55k Invitational qualifier, which was again the Crown 55k. That's where I normally, like, when I'm talking to a pro player, I'm like, the Crown 55k Invitational. That's where a lot of people's like quote unquote career starts. Not that it started there, but like that was like almost the point where I feel like ANZ CS kind of started to really pick up. So I wanted to just quickly mention this. And the team you played with, this seems like too good to be true, but Liazz, I don't know who Jay is. Infrequent, Sonic, and MC. Is this right?
Yeah, so I was subbing for them,
which was like time. That was like the core of what would become Atletico, which would become at one point one of Australia's best team.
Yep.
At a point.
Yeah.
So that was a very good roster, actually.
Yeah. So at the time, they were just like a high Division 2 team.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had the opportunity to sub for them. Kyoto asked me to sub. And that was kind of my first exposure to what real Counter-Strike, played like. Like their comms were like fantastic. Like flashes were crazy. Just it was. Yeah, like a really good, like I could tell straight away that this team is going to be like a top 4 team in the next like 6 months. So I was very grateful for that opportunity. I don't remember too much about the qualifier. I remember we won on train, and I played okay. But yeah, back then I was very like inexperienced. But everyone was so supportive. Like like they kind of gave me spots that I wanted. Like I was playing shotgun in on Cobble in the drop area. So we had a few good wins with some good teams. But yeah, I wasn't like a part of a team or anything, but just subbing in.
Yeah.
But it was it was a really, really good experience just to see, the skill level of these guys, and it kind of, motivated me to keep learning the game.
Yeah. Interesting as well. I don't know what the circumstances were around the 55k Invitational, but I don't think you ended up observing that.
Yeah. So so essentially, Kameen wanted me to observe it, and I believe it would have been paid, or even
I think it would have been paid.
Yeah, I think but it was my first week of Year 12. Yeah. So, and my parents didn't want me. Like, I never went to Melbourne before. I've never. Yeah. So, my parents didn't want me to go because of school. So, because of that, it's quite funny. Because of that event, then ESL kind of thought,
he's not committed or whatever.
I'm not. I won't be able to work that much. I'm too focused on the school and whatnot. So I didn't really get many opportunities. The year following.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, one of the first like proper opportunities I think that you did get was EB Expo, which would have almost been like 12 months later or something.
Yes.
9 months later, give or take. Because I remember Crown 55k would have been like October, November, and I think EB Expo is actually was kind of around that same time. It was like late in the year.
Yeah.
I always remember landing on the daylight savings weekend, so everyone was like really pissed because they would have to get up an extra hour earlier because of daylight savings, so they'd get 1 hour less sleep on the weekend where they're doing like all this event work, which is just, as anyone that does event work would know, horrible, losing an extra hour of sleep. But so was this kind of like your first in? I think this was like the first time you worked with ESL, because 55k was ESL, but prior to that it was always just like ACL and CG and stuff like that.
Yeah. So so essentially after I didn't get to go to the Crown event, I was still adminning for Cybergamer, and we ran a couple nationals that year, and Kameen and Nick Van Zeddy, a bunch of the ESL guys would always come over, and then they kind of noticed I was still keen, still kind of working. So they invited me for the EB Expo event because they wanted someone to be able to do the server admin. After the the noclip incident,
yes.
I think that was the determining factor. They wanted get someone a bit more dedicated to the role.
For those that don't know, there was an ANZ Champs LAN final, which was season 1. I think it was the season 1 final where there was like SV Cheats 1 was enabled on the server in one of the LAN matches, and Destiny, who was an older player, hit his noclip key and was just flying around the map, like obviously by accident. He did, but he was flying around the map in this one round, and it was like a whole thing. But it was pretty funny.
Yeah.
In hindsight, maybe not at the time.
so I did a lot of preparation work, like learning how to make all these server configs and whatnot. So my role for the event was server admin and secondary observer. So I wasn't focused on doing the main observing, just helping out here and there, doing some like picture-in-pictures or getting some extra replays. But that was my first interaction with the whole ESL Australia crew since ACL Sydney. So
yeah, so you went on to do like a few ANZ Champs things and that kind of thing, and I think over that period, I guess one of the biggest sort of talking points was that you were still at school, right? You were still finishing school, and like how did you sort of juggle all of that? Was that like because I can remember when I went to school, I had like a part-time job, which was just like I go to work at Woolies for like 5 hours a night, maybe like a couple nights a week, but this was like working all weekend. Yeah, all day, all weekend,
So thankfully, the EB Expo event, it was right between when I finished school and then before my final like HSC exams. Right. So that was okay. But in terms of the playing, juggling high school was pretty difficult. So once I got more into the playing aspect, I was I'd do all my homework at recess, lunchtime, directly after school before my mum picked me up. Yeah, and then I could get home and start practicing. But yeah, so in terms of the school, it didn't really clash that much with the work, which was good. But definitely university onwards, because then when I started observing more, it was pretty tough. Just balancing it all. I think it was more just a learning experience in terms of what to prioritize. So the subjects that I was really good at uni, I would spend less time on, because I knew I'd be able to get the marks. Like I still put in a lot of effort because I want to get good marks and everything. But yeah, definitely a lot of sleepless nights or But it is how it is.
That was good practice probably for your career, because ultimately there's probably a lot of sleepless nights when it comes to working remote shows, especially, which we get into during the COVID period. But before we get there, just one brief thing to sort of touch on, obviously, was at this point, right, there wasn't really like any, I think still at around 2016, 2017, there wasn't necessarily, especially in Australia, like any like dedicated observer names necessarily like building up. Like it was just you and Fish. If anyone remembers Fished, FIISHED, Fished.
Fishy.
He'll probably he'll appreciate the shout out. But what ended up happening, funnily enough, was obviously IEM Sydney 2017 rolls around, and like again, there's not that many big names in Australian esports generally, right? Even as casters and stuff like that, we were not really well known, and the same obviously for you guys as observers. But you basically were the observers for that event. Like there was no international observers that got flown down, which is crazy in hindsight. But like back then, it was just like.
Well, I think it's because Rush didn't want to come to Australia, or it still doesn't want to come to Australia.
Classic fucking Rush, by the way.
Yeah. So
2023 IEM Sydney doesn't turn up. Like, does that guy even work?
Yeah. So it was just Fish and I. But the event was kind of it was at a different scale.
It was definitely lower key for sure.
It's more just about how it came about. Was I didn't really get a whole lot of heads up that I will be working it. I still tried to prepare as best I could, but I was super busy with the uni. There was one day of the group stage I actually didn't work because I had to go to uni.
Yep.
But yeah, it was the event was very eye opening just in terms of just how difficult. Not so much how difficult, but just how large scale it is. Like it was a bit of a shock. I think.
Everything levels up at an event like that. You do the group stages, as you said, you did sort of okay there, and was it like kind of starting to feel a bit legit at that point, right? Like you've done all these like ANZ shows, and you're like, oh, this is fun. This is was it like what's the mentality at that point? Is it I'm doing this as a job, I'm doing this as a career, I'm just doing this as a part-time thing for fun?
I think that event was like super imposter syndrome. Right. Just like. Seeing all these pro players for the first time, seeing all this broadcast talent.
Because you were a little CS fanboy as well. Yeah. I think that didn't help because you're a big fan of all these players and stuff.
Yeah, so it was a big shock. But once I was doing the observing, I kind of zoned all that out, and I knew I was capable. So it didn't. Yeah, in terms of feeling legit, not so much. It was more just I was just doing it as a casual job. Like at that point, I never had the intention of like building a full career
Yeah.
out of it. I thought, I'll still finish my IT degree and then I'll do some networking or whatnot. So I was more just trying to have fun with it.
You just go through uni doing it, and then once you finish your degree, you'll
Yeah.
do whatever it ends up, being for a full-time job. But, obviously we get to the arena, and, you're doing the arena as well, which is kind of crazy. Like, first massive event in Australia. It's like you've got 2 Australian observers. Bearing in mind, by the way, like there was no Aussie casters on this show. Well, Uber was doing the desk hosting and Sniper was analyzing, I remember. But none of the Aussie casters were casting. So it was like, it was different in a sense, like later on, because it was almost always like, oh, okay, we've got a little bit of Australian representation at the 2018, 2019, and 2023 events, obviously. But for you were like one of the few Australian representatives on this initial show, where it felt very like isolated away from AUCS almost in a way. But everyone was kind of happy, I think, to see you there, excited and whatever. But there was one thing that happened at the arena days that was, not probably was it. Is it fair to say this was like the low light of your career, almost? I think, right? What was it? The final? Was it the grand final?
Yeah, grand final. So end up going through the whole group stage. First 2 days of playoffs. And I'm so self-conscious. I read all the Reddit comments and everything.
Yeah.
No negative comments at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just remember the grand final. I think it was the second map. It was Train or SK Gaming, and it was 5v5. 20 seconds left on the clock. Outside execute every single round.
Yep.
And it's just like, how are you meant to observe it? You just it's just so chaotic. Okay. And at that point, it's like, okay, I probably didn't do the best job. But keep in mind, I was, having to observe every single game for the whole week.
Also,
and working
your first big international
event. Big event, working 18-hour days, like doing extra like frag movies
17,
and
16.
Yeah, I think I would have was.
If you would have
18.
just started uni, you might have been just 18.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know. It's just all the contributing factors. I think it was so essentially what happened was during the grand final, I got replaced.
Yep.
I don't know whose decision it was or whatnot, but yeah. So that was quite challenging to deal with. But I think the company ESL soon realized, it was probably a mistake. But I think it was more. It wasn't so much the observing. Like looking back on it, I don't think it was that bad. I think for sure I could have done better, but it's more. I think it was more of a learning curve for the for ESL, because just like it's not sustainable. Just to identify that we actually need more resources in this area. So essentially right after that event, they ended up hiring Vlad, who's my current boss, and his Romanian team from PGL, to kind of take over this the broadcast innovation side. So handling the in-game production and the HUD and all that. So essentially it wasn't all just on one person, to execute the in-game side.
Yeah. So what I mean, obviously there was quite a bit of fallout from that on Reddit, as you said in particular. I think there was was there Reddit threads coming now that were like, the observing's so shit.
Yeah, it was like one. Kind of thing. It was one Reddit thread that was like 150 upvotes or something. Yeah. And that's kind of what sparked
the whole thing.
Yeah.
So what was it like? Obviously, you were reading that. Okay, first of all, I kind of want to know what it was like just from... Did the thread come before the final, or was it during the final / after?
I think it was during the final. I think it was...
Right. So okay, let's follow the timeline then, because you're observing the final. Map 1 happens, whatever. Goes to map 2. You get replaced during map 2.
Yeah.
Obviously, then at that point, you're feeling like, shit, what is... that like going through your head at that point in time? You're like, fuck.
I was pretty emotional. It was more just like, it was such a shock that I didn't really know how to process it.
Right.
I didn't really feel like I did anything particularly wrong. I think I thought it was I thought it was a bit bad that ESL kind of was listening to Reddit that much and whatnot, considering there was like nothing negative during the whole event. But so it was pretty difficult to deal with. I just but my state of mind wasn't.
I think people got to understand, like, for you, this was like the biggest opportunity, kind of.
Yes,
like
that
it
I've
was
ever-
like super cool. You know, you're like, holy shit,
Yeah.
like IEM, ESL, Counter Strike. This guy's been playing Counter Strike since he was fucking 15. You know, like big, you know, super sick opportunity. Like, holy shit, and then it's like that gets taken away from you, and it's like, fuck. Now I feel like shit.
Yeah,
It's like the dream gets turned into your nightmare.
Yeah, the biggest fear was, I lose my job now. Like, I'm not going to be asked for any more, casual work going forward or whatnot. But thankfully, the ACE Australia guys were super supportive. When they were speaking to the global office, and they all love the work that I was doing. So they said, there's no issues. Like, they understand kind of like how that decision happened, and it wasn't the best.
I specifically remember the AU office having a bit of a issue with the decision that was made. Like, I remember people saying this was not okay, and like, it was a thing. It was a thing between AU and global.
Yeah.
But anyway, the follow on from that obviously was like, you've now been taken off of the final, and then presumably at some point that day, that night, you see the Reddit thread as well.
Yeah.
So what does that then throw upon that extra? Like, are you already numb to it at that point, or are you like, oh, for fuck's sake, like, this gets even worse?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it took me a good 2 weeks just to kind of rationalize it. Like, I was pretty emotional for quite a while. I mean, I saw the Reddit thread during the day because I was like, so I was super confused. Like, it wasn't like the decision was like super, like they said like straight up, oh, we're replacing you, for the final or whatever. They just kind of replaced me.
Yeah.
And
no one said anything.
and didn't say anything. Didn't tell me why. There was no one to speak to. I was just like on my own. Like, until some of the Australian guys kind of saw what was happening. So I think that was a bit of a shock. But I don't know. I think a lot of good things came out of it. I think even though I realized, I probably didn't do that bad, but I probably could have done a bit better. I'm like, okay, I'll focus a bit less on the uni. I'll focus more on the observing and the playing side. And then from that event, I put a lot of time into the game. Like just watching demos every day, doing observing practice every day, and just studying the game like super heavily.
Yeah.
And then 2 months later, we end up the team I was playing with, we end up qualifying for ANZ Champs, which is a pretty big deal back then. So it's just I would try to take the positives from that situation. And just try focus my efforts on improving, just understanding. There is a lot more room to grow. Yeah,
for sure. Speaking of ANZ Champs, like, we'll talk about that quickly because that was like, I guess, kind of the last almost big thing that you kind of played in season 4 of ANZ Champs. You quad with Noxide. I don't want to spend too long on it because, again, like, it's now in hindsight like kind of just like a little blip in your career, but like you said at the time, pretty big thing. You were not allowed to observe the regular season while you were playing, if I remember correctly. So this was like where the decision now has to sort of start to come, and it was always kind of bubbling away under the surface. It was a bit like, oh, you need to choose one or the other. But this is like, okay, now you've actually qualified for ANZ Champs, which is what you were observing for prior. You can't observe now, but you do play. But then, you ultimately actually didn't qualify for the playoffs, which was almost lucky in hindsight because then you ended up being able to observe it. Lucky from the broadcast perspective. But yeah, I mean, this was, I guess, right where you had to sort of make that decision almost and kind of decide, like, is this where I want to be as a player or observer?
So I think thankfully in some sense, the team I was playing with, like Break in particular, he was super supportive of my job. Like we were like scheduling practice around my work and whatnot. And thankfully for this season, it was like an accelerated season. So you were playing 2 group stage matches a week. So it wasn't like I was out for like, 2 months of work. But yeah, so in terms of the decision, like in terms of, it was more so when I started observing other titles like Overwatch, Rainbow Six and whatnot, that it's just, you look at the calendar and there's just no time. There's no time to practice. So definitely took a bit of a step back from the playing, which was necessary. Because I liked the work so much, and my focus like soon shifted to hopefully I could do a good enough job so I can get asked back for IEM next year. So that's essentially it. I did kind of give it my all for the playing that season, in terms of competing, and I learned a lot about the game. And also because I knew that the two went hand in hand. Like the more you learn about the game, the better you'll be at to be observing. and the more you observe, the better you'll be at playing the game. So, so definitely tried super hard and learnt a lot. But and we had a couple good wins. Beat like Dexter's team or whatever.
Was it Chiefs back then?
They were. He was playing in the Atletico lineup with Sniper and Niquez. Right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we got to win versus Funky Monkeys and Avant. But it was just yeah, I enjoyed playing a lot, and I enjoyed learning the game. But I understood, okay, these guys are so much more experienced than me. They've all been playing like 1.6 and whatnot, and kind of like it was so hard for like a new team to break through past like top 8 in Oz. Yep. So I just looked at it and I was like, okay, I've got a good opportunity here with the work. I see the industry's growing, so I want to kind of put all my eggs in that basket. Yeah,
turned out to be a pretty good commitment. Obviously, in hindsight, I mean, do you think you ever would have made it as a player? You know what I mean? Like, would you be on like a Vertex or a Greyhound at this point? Because that's the only way that this would have ended up being more worth it as a player, or as worth it as a player as what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I honestly think I'm better, like I'm at a higher skill level at the game now because of my observing than I would have been if I continued playing.
But the general level of play is also higher.
Yes,
it's like you might have gone up 10% or 50%, let's say, but the skill level of the game has gone up 75%. Is that?
Yes. I mean, look,
where are we sitting in that?
I mean, in terms of the guys I was competing with back then and where they are now, they're all in top 3 teams in the country. So I do think I probably could have made like, top 4-ish team. Like even when I quit the second time around, I had some like decent offers for to play or to coach. But it's hard to say. I honestly feel like I got 10 times better at the game, doing all the observing and grinding all the online observing work. It's just people underrate watching demos, and if you can like watch demos for a living, with the observing, it's just so much knowledge that you learn.
Well, speaking of like learning and observing and this kind of thing, I want to sort of touch on some of the other titles that you observed kind of briefly, because again, like the vast majority of your career, and especially at this point now, you're kind of solely in Counter-Strike. But you did, as you said, you mentioned Overwatch, you mentioned Rainbow Six, you did a bit of PUBG and stuff like that as well. You did Fortnite, I'm sure, and stuff. So there's plenty of things to sort of touch on here, but I don't want to spend too long on it. But like, big opportunities come in Overwatch as well. Like you were doing contenders, and you also did Overwatch World Cup 2017, which like, beyond IEM Sydney, that was kind of like the biggest esports event in ANZ. So you've kind of gone back to back in terms of the big esports events. And what was it kind of like observing Overwatch, right? Because it's a very different game, obviously, to Counter-Strike. Do you think it made you a better observer? Did it make you think about observing in a different way?
100%. So I was so for Overwatch World Cup qualifier, I was very grateful to work with Jason Baker, who went on to produce the E-League majors and whatnot, and a couple of his team from overseas. So it was 4 of us observing plus him in-game directing. And I learned just not so much things about the game. I mean, it was a lot of game knowledge as well, but more so his philosophy of in-game directing, storytelling, a lot of technical aspects in terms of. So my role was doing free camera, so just flying around. So we had 2 free cameras and two first person POVs. And just in terms of learning, like a bunch of rules, like for example, like the 180 rule. You always want like the attackers on the left, the defenders on the right, like the whole game pretty much. Where you can. So it's just trying to make a game that is complicated on the outside as simple for the viewers to process, and in terms of how to sequence cuts. How to paint the picture of what's happening, in that particular fight, but not, but choosing who to focus on and being okay with missing some action
if they didn't get the thing, or
So but it was a big learning experience because obviously he's a big CS guy, Jason. So just. Like told him about, what happened IEM Sydney and whatnot, and he was telling me about all his, Counter-Strike experience over the years, and just gained a lot of insight in terms of how to approach storytelling,
the process,
yeah.
Did you ever think, like, when you were doing this and when you were doing Overwatch contenders and stuff, did you ever think, okay, well, maybe CS doesn't work out, but I could end up being an Overwatch observer, or the same for like Rainbow Six, for example?
Yeah. I wouldn't have minded working Overwatch. Like Overwatch. Overwatch League.
The thing is, like, I know that
Yeah.
you are a Counter-Strike person
Yes.
at your core. Like, that's where you started. That's your passion. That's the game that you love. But would you still be in esports if it didn't work out with Counter-Strike? It's kind of like, would you have ended up, if you ended up with the same level of opportunity in Overwatch or Rainbow Six or PUBG or anything, would you still be doing it?
I think it's just the geographical differences I think it's a bit harder to kind of break through in those games, coming from Australia. But say I did have the same level of opportunity, I think Rainbow Six would probably be the game I'd prefer. But Overwatch, I do think. Okay, so essentially, like throughout 2018, I was 2017, 2018, I was working with Tim Roots, and then and Daniel Cinderella, who was a pro player, and just learnt so much about Overwatch from these two guys, and just once I understood how the game the rhythm of the game, it was pretty easy to predict, like, okay, when the ultimates would happen, the kind of sequences that would play out, and I just so it got to a stage where as a duo, like, we look at, like, we compare our work to the Overwatch League, and we're like, okay, I think, like, our product is better. But I don't know. I feel like I'll still Counter-Strike guys at heart. I think the real question was more so the Rainbow Six, because maybe a year prior to that, I did consider swapping to play Rainbow Six instead of CS,
right?
Just because it was like super tactical. And there were a lot of players who swapped from CS to Rainbow Six, and trying to, like, poach all these CS players. But in terms of observing, I like doing Overwatch a lot, and Rainbow Six was super different though. It was just, it's just like 4 or 5 floors. There's no minimap. You got to try and memorize as much as you can. But I was playing the game quite a lot, so I had decent game knowledge there.
Yeah. So was it ever? Yeah. Like, I mean, with Rainbow Six, I feel like you did Rainbow Six because it was there, but it was never like. I want to say it was never like a passion project.
Yeah. So I think I was definitely most passionate about CS, and Overwatch I was pretty passionate about as well. Rainbow Six, I did enjoy the game, but it was very difficult. But the thing is, there wasn't anyone else who could observe it
at the time.
At the time. Like even once I kind of started falling out of the meta a bit, all the casters were super impressed with my work. And I'm like, I kind of felt a bit guilty. I'm like, I don't really play the game that much. I just think it just goes to show how difficult observing CS is, and how it can translate to these other titles.
Did you ever feel like, at that time you would have been doing 3 games pretty regularly with CS, Overwatch, Rainbow Six, kind of all overlapping on top of each other? I've had that same experience with casting, and it's kind of like, at a certain point, it's just really hard to kind of not care, but like commit the necessary brain power, willpower, time to at least one of, if not maybe sometimes 2 of these things, where you're just like, oh, fuck, now I've got to go in and observe Overwatch for 2 days on the weekend, and then the next day it'll be 2 days in a row of Rainbow Six, and then ANZ Champs is on again. It's just like you're just never stopping.
Yeah, so I think it was definitely like initially I was spending a lot of time like playing Overwatch, playing Rainbow Six, but then as I got better with the observing, and it wasn't necessary for me to play as often, then I just focused on the CS, because I'm like, okay, IEM next year, is kind of my focus. But yeah, like, but even other titles like World of Tanks, that was super fun to work on.
True, you did that too. Yeah, like
so there was a time where I was doing all 4 games, and I was working like 7 days a week. So it was super fun, just in terms of learning as much, learning all the different roles and having different levels of responsibility. So later going on to do some in-game directing for PUBG and Fortnite. So having a team of observers to command, that was super fun. It's just like, I think those games in particular, the Battle Royale games, they're really interesting from a viewer perspective. There's just so much going on, but being able to determine which fights are important to focus on, how to how to portray certain certain fights, like stitching together 3-cam and first person, and follow the grenade here, or look at the Fortnite builds over here, or whatever. Like it's just, there's so much going on, and the communication is so high. I feel like you have to have like a IGL brain, to do those kind of jobs.
Which, funnily enough, obviously you did have, because you were an IGL when it came to Counter-Strike. So yeah, I wanted to sort of touch on like in that period, and again, I know we're sort of taking a departure away from Counter-Strike, but these are all kind of quite important moments, I think, of your career as an observer, developing that. But I wanted to touch on how it was like taking the role from being just an observer to kind of almost being like the observer, where you now are the one that, when it comes to like Rainbow Six and Overwatch, you probably have a little bit of a say of like, okay, this is actually how we need to do things when it comes to observing this game in ANZ, and okay, this is who I want to work with, and this is how I want to build my team, and like you said, with PUBG and stuff like that as well. Like, so how does it go from being like, someone who's like just doing the observing and not having to think about anything else, to then having all these other kind of responsibilities? Was that a little bit like daunting, or did you like sort of welcome that? Did you like that level up in skill and
I liked it a lot.
Responsibility?
I was very happy that the Australian office was super like welcoming to hearing me out on a bunch of the ideas I had. They trusted me a lot with in terms of how I kind of wanted to observe certain games, and the fact that I was interested in learning the broadcast side. So learning a lot about the broadcast side, how to do these picture-in-pictures and whatnot. Like for Overwatch, I think in particular was quite useful. So that was kind of like my first interaction with, okay, how can we improve the broadcast in terms of the in-game production side? So I'm grateful that they kind of trusted me with hearing me out.
Which is kind of like what you're doing a lot now, right? Yeah. In-game production and development and that innovation and stuff like that. One of the more interesting parts of your career, I felt like, was #MC abroad, if you remember this.
Oh, yeah.
This was a big thing because this was your first international trip to ROG Masters 2017. So I know we've kind of like jumped forward and jumped back a little bit, but, whatever. You went to Malaysia. Was it Malaysia?
Yeah, Malaysia,
right? Yep. For ROG Masters. I was there. A lot of people were there. Ben was there. I think Ben was the one who really started #MC abroad, and I think Danny might have been there. Yeah, Danny was there, and Sniper and
Kevin.
Yeah. So we had a pretty fairly high level contingent of AU people going. Brennan as well. I think that no one knows Brennan, obviously.
And Kameen and
Kameen. Like, so there was a lot of Aussies going to this show, which was really cool. But for you in particular, it was obviously really cool because it was your first time overseas. For a lot of us, we'd done a few overseas gigs before, but you were someone who'd never been overseas. Was never been overseas.
Yeah, never been overseas.
Not even never been overseas for work, but literally never been overseas. You weren't even 2 years ago, you weren't even allowed to go to Melbourne to fucking observe. So you're now overseas. So the whole meme was like, this is MC's first his MC in his first airport, his MC in his first other country, whatever. So what was this trip like for you? Because I remember this trip like, oh man, this was a great trip. I love going to those events. But how was it for you?
It was fantastic. But it was just like leading up to it. So they didn't need an observer. So it was just like all you guys going.
Did you have a passport?
No.
Yeah.
So there was it wasn't they told me, I think it was 5 days out. Oh, we can use an observer. You want to come? And I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh, I got to convince my parents to let me go. Somehow I convinced them, and then did the express passport. Got it just in time for the trip. But yeah, so it was first time overseas. It was such a shock. I just remember walking out of the airport and it was just so humid. I'm like, oh my god, what is happening?
Where the fuck am I?
Yeah. But it was super fantastic event. I spent a lot of time just working on my kind of observer package, doing all these cinematics at that point. I was programming a lot of cinematics. So I wanted to make it as good as possible, and it was good that the Greyhound guys went because I was friendly with those guys, so I got to chat with them a little bit. But yeah, it was just it was a lot of work, that event though, as solo observer. But it was so fun. It's just the crowd, they were really into it, into the games, and just I don't know, just the whole experience, just hanging out with all you guys. Yeah,
Well, this was the pool as well. This is where we went to the pool.
We went to a pool,
oh god, for
Yeah.
people that don't know, mate, this was like one of the best pools in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
world. I was not sold on it really because Danny was like, "Oh, we got to go check this pool out." I was like, "Oh god, I don't know, man. Like it's just a fucking pool." But you go up like 50
Yeah.
floors in this giant high-rise tower, and then it's like an infinity pool, which
Yep.
means there's no edge. Obviously, there is an edge because they don't want you falling off 50 floors worth of
Yeah.
pool, but you can't see the edge, right?
Yep.
So all you see is like the skyline, and I was like, "Holy shit, we've made it! Like this is esports, baby." Good time.
That was beautiful.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
Was there ever a moment where you were like, or at this event where you thought, okay, again, like this is maybe something that could be more than what I think it is or what it is right now?
Yeah, I mean, when I kind of saw the, like how it had like same price pool as IEM Sydney, and but it was only like 6 teams, and how into the crowd, like how into it the crowd was. I'm like, oh, okay, the industry actually is growing here. Like maybe I could kind of build a career out of it. So I wasn't too like worried about if I'll be able to like get asked back for any international events or anything. I kind of was happy if it was like a one-off or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I just love the experience.
Yeah. For me, it was always like whenever I was going overseas for esports, I was like, this is kind of where it starts to feel a little bit more legit. Because obviously there's so much money involved in getting people overseas. And I was like, if they're going to do this, then there must be something. We must be doing something right. If we're getting asked to go to Malaysia to do a show, like no one who's dog shit gets asked to do that. Basically, was my methodology. And I always thought that it was really cool. Anyway, we'll move on. Obviously, 2018 IEM Sydney comes back around, and you're doing it again. But was there ever any like anxiety, nerves, pressure? Because of what happened in 2017?
I mean, yeah, for sure. But the funny thing is, I didn't even know I was working it until like literally the day before. Like no one could tell me, and then I saw the talent announcement had my name on it.
Isn't it?
Yeah, and then I saw it had my name on it. I'm like, oh, okay. So and then I'm asking like, what's my role? And they're like, oh, we're bringing some international observers. You'll just be in like a support observer role.
Okay.
I'm like, what does that mean? And they're like, oh, I don't know. You'll just help out with like replays or something. I'm like, okay. So anyway, I'm like, I'll just go into it open mind, see what happens. But then so meeting DJ and Heather, Prius and Sapphire, and they were super welcoming. They're like, oh no, we'll share the main observer around. So we did it so it's like one person would do the main observer, one person would do the replays, and one person would have a break, and we just like rotate.
Yeah.
So they were super welcoming in that aspect. They're like, oh yeah, if there's any games you want to do with like Australian teams or whatever, just let us know. So they were just fantastic. I think it was also just ESL kind of realized, oh, okay, the name value of like, I think the problem the year before wasn't just that, oh, I was doing it by myself. It was just people, the community, they kind of just see the names of who's doing it. And at that time, it's like, oh, if Prius and Sapphire aren't observing, the observing is just
just like the classic
bad.
community bandwagon.
Yeah. So just kind of having my name in the mix was, it shields, it a bit. Yeah.
For sure. Renegades Mousesports.
Yes.
You were observing that game, right?
Yep.
I was casting that game. Obviously this was a huge moment for my career, but I wonder what it was like from your perspective because, it feels kind of like the perfect storm in a way, right? You've got AU event, AU crowd, AU team, AU caster, AU observer.
Yep.
Like, it was all like, oh man, someone on that day just decided Australia's going to have a good day.
Yep.
So what did you feel observing that?
Yeah. So as soon as I found out that you were casting that one, and I like specifically requested, I'm like, oh, please let me observe this one.
Yep.
So they were happy to let me do it. And so I wasn't super nervous. It was more just I was determined to do a good job.
Right.
But I remember every round I was like maximum focus. Didn't want to miss
Locked
anything. In. Yeah. So it was just like the most surreal game ever. Like all those overtimes, the nifty 50. I remember I caught like every single AWP kill, and it's just as soon as that game was done, just the relief was like,
really?
oh my god, I actually did it,
Ah, God, I remember when that game was done, I had just had so much adrenaline going through me because, I mean, maybe it was different for you having done IEM Sydney 2017, but for me, that was my first really big arena that spoke English, because I'd done arenas. I'd done arenas in China. I'd done arenas in Russia, but I'd never done one where I was the main caster.
Yep.
And everyone was coming up to me like, "Oh, you did such a great job!" Like, because it was a sick game, which really helps. Because like now no one comes up to me and says, "You did such a sick job casting that, Jordan." Because it's like not that it's expected, but it's almost like it's not as cool as the first time you do it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
People are like really happy for you the first time you do it. You'll notice this like when someone gets their first big opportunity on Twitter, for example, everyone's liking their tweet and sharing it. And it's like, you know, when you've done it 10 times already, like people are like, "Oh, okay, he's on IEM Sydney again." It's like, all right. Yeah, but it's still special.
Yep.
But the first time, and when everyone's coming, I don't know, did you have this same experience where everyone was like really hyped about it? And did you have like this adrenaline? Because for me, I had this massive adrenaline where I was like, "Holy shit, this was like a fucking amazing game." I felt like I'd done a good job, you know?
Yep.
So I was feeling really good, like walking around. I was like, "Geez, this was sick. This was like the night of my life."
Yeah, I mean, well, the fact that I was able to walk around a bit, you know, the games I had off, and just like people in the community who recognized me. And they were saying, "Oh, you know, fantastic job yesterday."
Yeah.
It was just so special. It was just, I don't know, just having that kind of validation was, I don't know. I knew, okay, I kind of made up for last year, kind of thing. So, but yeah, it was just insane game. Like, it's a shame that they lost, but it was just, I don't know, just from a fan perspective. Just the crowd was the loudest I've ever heard, like Australian crowd.
It's going to be hard to beat.
Yeah,
it really is going to be hard to beat, particularly with the fact that AU teams struggle to get to the arena now. But anyway, that's besides the point. Look, we'll speed things up a little bit. I think going through 2019 in particular, there isn't really a huge amount like specifically to touch on. You're kind of getting a lot more of the like decent gigs and that kind of thing. But I kind of wanted to go to Beijing 2019, which I think was another one of these sort of international events that you got on. And this is almost where things kind of started to get rolling a little bit internationally for you. It was like around Beijing 2019, Katowice 2020. So they would have been relatively close together.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that whole experience.
Yeah, so okay, so the year prior I did the Shanghai 2018, and then the following year did the IEM Sydney 2019 and the Beijing 2019. But at that stage, I kind of realized, oh wait, they only kind of want me for the Asia Australia games, you know. So I was pretty upset that I didn't get to work the Katowice 2019 major, because that one I was like really hoping to be asked for. But then I kind of understood, oh, okay, it's probably not that realistic. But then, yeah, so Beijing 2019 was like super fun event, 100 Thieves, you know, second place, and JKS just like insane with the org, like the meta back then. So that was like a really fun event to work because, you know, you had like a local team to kind of do, so similar to Sydney. But then it was funny because right after that event, the day I landed at like 7 a.m.
Classic.
And then I went to uni. I decided to go uni at like, you know, a few hours later. And then, which I wasn't going to go, but I had to go. And then I went from uni to work because we did ESL Pro, we were doing ESL Pro League.
Yeah.
Asia Pacific. And I'm like, oh, I wasn't going to work, but I'm like, oh, I'll just do it, you know? And lucky I went to work that day because I was doing my like regular cinematics, and like for those who don't know, I made like this camera matrix where I had all these cinematics that would like jump around different spots on the map, and someone decided to clip it, put it on Reddit, and then it blew up.
Right.
It just it was the most surreal thing ever. Like the clip wasn't even that good. Like I've done like better sequences, you know, before, but I don't know. Yeah, the community loved it. It got to like top of Reddit, like 6,000 upvotes. Like Twitter was like popping off, and like I had like an exam the next day, and it was just the most surreal thing ever. I'm like, oh, I wasn't even going to work this day. But that was kind of like a defining moment in my career. Like when Reddit is kind of like your best friend, and then people at work kind of notice. And then yeah, so Vlad's team, Vlad, who's my current boss, his team then reached out and asked, "Oh, we'd like to have you for Katowice 2020. You know, like if you can prepare all these cinematics for all the different maps, and I'll do it as in the Ingame Director position."
Right.
So that was like opportunity of a lifetime. I'm like, I put in so much work for that event. Yeah. So
Katowice 2020, that's almost like where you kind of step into the role you're in now, right?
Yes.
Which was you stepped away from being the observer who's clicking 1, 2, 3, swapping between the players, to then doing more of the in-game directing, choosing what angles are coming out and this kind of thing. And I suppose developing those angles as well.
Yep.
Like creating the paths and whatever. I don't know shit about observing, but yeah, someone has to make them, right? So I guess there you go. But not only that, but 2020, if you remember, obviously, is when COVID kind of starts worming its way into the sphere. So what was it like being in Katowice while this was all going down?
Before we talk about that, I just want to say the lead up to the event was like the most stressful week of my life.
Right.
Okay, because the week up until I flew, essentially, I was finishing my final university project. I started full-time work at East Australia, doing like observing and some IT stuff, and I was still finishing off all this Katowice prep, and my grandmother passed away, like all in the 1 week, and it was just like, and then there was word about this COVID stuff and whatnot. It was so much stress that 1 week, but then ended up still going. I just remember go to the funeral on Thursday, and then Friday morning fly out to Poland.
Fuck, that's a turnaround, isn't it?
Yeah. So that was it was quite a big shock, just in terms of like everything happening at once.
Yeah.
But anyway, get over there. It's like my first time in Europe ever. So learning how to deal with time zone differences and jet lag and whatnot. But yeah, just get straight to work straight away. Prepare as well as I can for the event. Everything's kind of normal. We do the group stage, and it's funny, like the production is at the arena, okay, even for the group stage and everything. So just working the event. Like the very first game, I was super nervous though. I just remember I was like, when I went to press the buttons on my stream deck, I was shaking. I was like, it was so much pressure because it was the first Katowice I've done, like first like $1 million event.
Yeah.
And being in a role like with more responsibility. The first day I probably didn't do that fantastic. I think I was doing a bit too many cuts and whatnot. But then I kind of like reflected and reviewed, and then second day onwards, much better. But yeah, everyone at ESL were super supportive, and they liked the work I was doing. So then the playoffs come around, and then we cancel the arena, unfortunately, because of COVID, and it just didn't feel real. I don't know. It was just so eerie, just doing these playoff games with an empty arena. And while the production is like backstage.
Did you ever like worry about getting sick, or did you ever think like, oh, maybe I won't be able to get home, like lockdowns and this and that?
Nah. Back then it was like, it was more just, it felt like an overreaction.
Yeah, right.
It was just like, what's kind of the big deal?
Yeah.
And like there were no masks or anything. Like I think when it really hit me was when I took the flight home. And the flight was like empty, and the airport was like dead.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay.
Okay, this is real.
Yeah. But there were no concerns about that. But it was weird, like, when you go to work and then they do the temperature check and whatnot. Then I'm like, oh, it's a bit strange.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we were still talking about, Vlad was like, we want you to do ESL Pro League finals in Denver, in a few months' time and whatnot. So everyone was kind of still treating it like, oh, is it just going to blow over in like a couple weeks or something?
Wasn't quite. Yeah. I remember, because I remember specifically in February of 2020, I was having a conversation with someone in this apartment at the lift. And they're like, oh, have you heard about this COVID thing? I was like, oh, yeah, like I've heard about it. It's probably not, it's going to be like, what is it going to be like? Bird flu, swine flu, mad cow disease, whatever, all these sort of things that which you for people from Australia, especially, like we've heard about, but they're always somewhere else. Never really ended up being a problem for us. And then obviously COVID ended up being way more than that. But yeah, I just remember people were like, yeah, whatever, like it'll blow over. It'll probably just be stuck in China and that'll be fine. And obviously then it wasn't. So I can understand why it was like that as well over there. We'll move forward, I guess, to the actual COVID period and how this sort of all impacted your career and stuff, because this is where you sort of, as you said, have started to kind of get a little bit more entrenched with ESL globally, rather than being like an AU guy doing AU shows. You're now, I remember at this time you were like half splitting kind of half your time doing AU and half your time doing global, which obviously in itself has a lot of challenges. We mentioned the like overnighters and the lack of sleep and this and that. That's this period basically. But not only that, but you're also now doing things like ESL 1 Cologne, ESL Pro League, IEM New York, IEM Beijing, like all of these remote, right?
Yeah.
So these were like the Cologne online year and whatever and stuff like that. So I presume you're just like sitting in your bedroom at home, basically at like 3 a.m. in the morning, pushing some buttons, getting like these fucking shit going on in the server. But like, what was that all like? Because I think also, by the way, not that this probably helped. In fact, it probably hindered your health. But I'm pretty sure this was the time where we were like really hard grinding Rust as well. So it was kind of like, not only were you working all these overnight shows and doing AU shows, but you were also like grinding Rust. And if anyone that has played Rust before, they know that that's like a full-time job as well. Like putting 14 hours in the Rust server and it just, you know, so
I was maintaining our cloth farm.
Our farm base and shit like that. Like what the, so what was this whole period like doing overnight shows during COVID online at, you know, like 3 a.m. in the morning with a team from Europe or whatever?
Yeah. Okay. So, I think just starting off, when I got back from Poland and then the kind of COVID period happened, and everything was kind of shut down, I'm like, oh, this is kind of like my opportunity is kind of gone now. You know, I had all these like events lined up, and then I'm not going to be able to go because it all got cancelled. And then you know, I think the global guys, they did like Road to Rio and a bunch of other tournaments in the studio, and I'm like, okay, I guess I've lost my opportunity. But then, thankfully, Parsec became a thing. It's like a remote desktop software for gaming, and the performance was great. And the global guys wanted to do have me in the in-game director role, remote production. So I would remote into my PC over in the studio in Poland, and I did a lot of programming to make, you know, all this stuff work. You know, make sure that my Stream Deck buttons all work. You know, trigger actions on the computer over there and whatnot. And yeah, so yeah, the ESL One Cologne was like the big first event. And I was like super excited for it because just like, you know, it's the same scale as the Katowice event. Okay, sure, it was online, but yeah, being able to work with the international guys again was fantastic. So that but then basically that period, these whole 6 months, it was just overnight work. You know, so start at like, you know, 7 p.m., 8 p.m., finish at, you know, 7 a.m. You know, like it would shift a few hours with all the time zone differences, daylight savings and whatnot. But it's just, overnight every day, 6 days a week. We had like 1 day off. It was like 6 days a week for 3 months straight, pretty much. Just all these shows back to back to back. Because instead of doing like a 1 week LAN, they turned it into like a 3 week online
league or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So but it was probably the most it was one of the most important periods of my career, I think, because as an observer team, so me, Rushley, Jakey, and Bastian, the four of us, we grinded so hard. Just so many games back to back. Like our synergy was crazy. And then in terms of what I learned about the game, just like it was just so much, you know, demo watching. Like I'm studying the game during my in-game directing. And it's just, I feel like skill level wise, we kind of like all leveled up like an insane amount. So then when it came time for the LAN events to come back, we were like super ready.
You know, it's funny that you have that same experience I think that I had with Pilly and Mac, right? Because it's the same thing. Like we were doing these online overnight shows just from the studio because AU was one of the only studios that could work. So we got a lot of like these B stream kind of things. And it was just like you with the same people doing more or less the same exact show, just copy pasted. This is the Beijing version. This is the Cologne version. This is the Pro League version. It was just the same show. Like Runner show was exactly the same, more or less. And you're just grinding out the hours. And I think, that sort of was a period where we felt like we leveled up as well. So it's kind of interesting how that all sort of works out. It's just weird that, you know, you just put in the hours and you just grind and grind and grind. And there was a lot of hours during the online period, which is funny. Like you'd think when everything shuts down, it would get a bit easier. But in fact, it almost got a bit harder just on the workload. So I wanted to know what that did to you as a person. Like, did you struggle with like any health ramifications or anything? Because like I can imagine doing overnight shows and doing not even shows but just working overnights for that period of time cannot have been easy on your body and on your mental health and that kind of thing, which is a big discussion nowadays, obviously.
I think for the first like 3/4 of it, I was all right because I was just super excited, super into it. Like I was fine, but it's just like when you're doing like microwave meals, at like 3 a.m. and whatnot, and it's like you sleep through the whole day, so you have like no time to like go outside or anything. It's yeah, I think mentally it was like pretty draining by the end of it. But I was still like super grateful for the opportunity. So I wasn't like too bothered by it. But then I think it was more so just juggling the ESL Australia work at the same time. So for the first period of it, I was still working full time with the Australian office. So like you said before, it was like half global work, half Australia work. So it's just like you finish 12-hour broadcasting, you got to stay up an extra few hours just to finish some additional work. It was just like kind of too much. Like it was like 2 jobs at once. So once a bit later on, I kind of just I joined the broadcast development team at ESL Global. So it was more focused on the CS side. And then once that happened, it was like even though I was still working a lot of crazy hours, it was at least a bit more of a work-life balance, even if the hours are a little bit crazy here and there.
Yeah. So we'll move on from that. I mean, going into 2021 and, as things start to kind of open up a little bit, what was actually the first event back that you got to do that you went overseas for? Because I remember there was the major that got cancelled, which you were like wanting to do, and then that didn't happen. And
we were going to do the Rio Major. I believe it was IEM Katowice.
21 or 22?
22.
22.
Oh, sorry. Okay. 21. We did. We had the LAN, or maybe it was 22. One of them we had the LAN. And I did it remotely. I did the playoffs.
I think you did 21 remotely because I've got down here 21 remotely.
21. Yeah. So I did 21 remotely. Just the playoffs.
Right.
Because at that time it was when I was doing more of the programming side. I was more valuable to the company as a programmer rather than an in-game director. So essentially what happened was halfway through all the online stuff, I taught J-Raz, who's a good friend of Rush, my kind of role, and he was kind of taking over for like the long like ESL Pro League seasons and whatnot. So then so for that IEM Katowice event, he worked the group stage, and then I did the playoffs remotely, because they did ask me to go, but this was right when the merger happened, and beforehand they said, oh, there's not enough money to send you over. So I'm like, oh, okay, no worries. And then all of a sudden the merger happened, and then like 3 days out, they're like, oh, we can send you if you really want to come.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the vaccination, so I wasn't able to go. So I'm like, oh, I'll just do it remotely. So I did it remotely, and then the first event back was Dallas.
Was that IEM Dallas?
IEM Dallas, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so that was like the first event back for me, and that was awesome. Like it was just kind of like the whole crew was back together. Like even for Rush and whatnot, because like the Poland it didn't really feel like that big of a deal because they were in the same studio the whole time as the online stage. But like actually going to a new place, everyone is there. That was a lot of fun.
So at that point, you must have felt like you've kind of solidified yourself in this like world, right? You've got you're working now for global rather than AU. You've done all these tier 1 events, even if they're online remote. But when everything opened back up and you had the opportunity to go to them as well, that was then offered to you as well. So it's like you're on the circuit at that point.
Yeah. So essentially, I still understood like the how geographically it's a bit challenging. So got to justify my position. So I just tried to be as useful as possible. So I just having a bit of extra responsibility in terms of so when I'm over there, I can help out with the stage integration, help make sure that all the game data with all the lighting and all that is working, and then just having a bit more responsibility with things like our in-game HUD, developing that. So just being a bit more in charge of the in-game production. So it was kind of where my role kind of evolved.
Did you feel like you'd made it at that point? Like, is there ever a thing where you've like thought, okay, I've kind of made it?
I think it was the Katowice afterwards.
The 2022.
2022, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, where then I was like, oh, okay, I'm a bit more comfortable now. I know I'm good at what I do. I know that people trust the work I do, so I can just focus more on doing a good job rather than needing to try to like impress people or whatnot. Yeah.
Built the confidence up and
Yep.
yeah, you had that in yourself. One thing that I have just remembered was we haven't talked about the major. I feel like we kind of have to talk about the major, right? Your first major that you attended or worked at. Was that 2022?
Yeah. So IEM Rio 2022. So that was
okay. So
it was
contextually
surreal.
as well, by the way, you were going to work the Rio Major that got cancelled.
Yes.
So in the background, you knew that was happening, and you were like psyching yourself up to work a major, and then obviously it got cancelled, which makes you feel like shit.
Yep.
Then you go to work the 2022 major. So I think that's it, just important context.
Yeah, because it's always
discussing this.
Yep. And like, because it's always, because once that major got cancelled, it's always a big question mark. Oh, because lots of different TOs host majors.
Yep.
So I'm like, oh, okay, the chance that ESL will get one in the next few years might be a bit low. But thankfully we got the major, and yeah, so I put in so much effort. Like we did a bunch of new features for that. I worked on some augmented reality, so being able to put these video screens in the game, and then also things like that we did later on was these like smoke timers in augmented reality and whatnot. But yeah, just definitely went all out for that major. Like we had some extra features like 1v1 scene. But in general, just the approach was okay. This is finally like like I finally made it kind of thing. Like I really my whole career I'm like, if I can work a major, that's kind of like the pinnacle. So it was just fantastic, especially like Furia winning that quarterfinal game was super hype. The crowd was super into it. So yeah, no, and just going to a place like Brazil, very different to places I went to in Europe and Asia. So just different experience, and just being a longer event as well. Like it was just an awesome experience all around.
Did it feel different to be there at a major in comparison to a normal event, or did like when you were working it was just like the same job?
Pressure, like that everyone is watching.
Yeah, the whole Counter-Strike world.
Yes, so definitely a lot of responsibility. Well, but once we got into, I think not just for me, I think all my observers, everyone was a bit like a lot of them worked majors before as well. So but I think just in general, it's just like always like the first map of a major is like everyone kind of freaks out a bit. It's just like hopefully nothing goes wrong, hopefully everything goes smoothly, and but then once you kind of get into the rhythm of things, it's you kind of forget about all that. Like it's funny because like I don't. The viewership was crazy for that event, but I don't really think about the viewers online that much. It's more like if I have one person standing behind me, I get more nervous.
Yeah.
Then it's like online viewers.
At a certain point, it's kind of just a number on a screen. I've sort of thought about this as well when I've been a caster, and I'm like, I've casted games to, I don't know what the highest number would be, but maybe like 150k, something like that for an IEM Sydney. It was like that. I feel like maybe 120k might have been watching the Mouse Renegades game. I don't know if that number sounds ridiculous to people, but I feel like that sounds kind of okay. That might have been the biggest one for me. And like at a certain point, it's like, does it matter if it's 120k or 500k? Like it's still a lot of people, but like it's just a number on the screen,
Yeah, but I think for me, when we worked that Katowice event and we got over 1 million, that's
like, a milestone though. That's a bit different.
Yeah, that was like. Yeah, I freaked out a little bit for that. I'm like, oh my god, like
put 1 million people in a room, mate, and that'll freak you out. I think.
So but I mean, for me, it's more just when I go to all the events and then we do the group stage. Group stage is kind of like it's a lot of fun, but there's no real pressure. And then all of a sudden, like on the Friday, you have all the crowd come to the arena, and you just turn up for work, and there's like 1 million people lining up.
Yeah,
and it's just. That's where it kind of like hits you that, we're doing it for these guys, like there's so many people who love the game, who love watching, the esports. So, it gives you a bit of extra motivation to do a good job for them.
For sure. What at that point now, like, or what at this point, because it's kind of like this is now what you're doing, right? We're almost up to the present day. There's been a bunch of IEM Sydneys and stuff like that, but like, is there anything necessarily to like specifically touch on with any of those? Not so sure. But what does it kind of look like nowadays? Like, what do you do? What is your day-to-day job? Because I think people will look at you and say, oh, he's an observer, but it's like you're not really that anymore, are you?
Yeah, so it's I think about 80% of my job is just programming. So yeah, it's quite funny actually. So at uni, I had to pick some programming subjects, and I was so adamant. I'm like, oh, I don't want to be a programmer. It's too difficult. And then I started like learning how to program with the game data and like make my observing a little bit better over the years. And then I kind of like just grew in terms of grew my love for the programming side of things. So now my job it's basically all programming. Not just Counter-Strike, but also other games like PUBG Mobile and a lot of other titles. Things like all these stats and HUDs and
so you had a lot to do with making the ESL HUD, right?
So the current CS:GO HUD, I basically took over the project, and then and when we did a bunch of updates and changes, then I was involved in all that, and now that kind of is my project in terms of maintaining it, and then we have a new one planned for next year, so building that one from the ground up. But yeah, in general, it's just lots of different broadcast integrations across different areas, like even helping out the Australian office with, say, League of Legends, the HUD, the overlay for them, for LCO, and then also things like the stage integration for when we did the live events, having all these, nice LED content and whatnot. So just understanding the power of the programming and how you can achieve, like how you can improve the viewer experience, with additional information and automation.
So do you come up with ideas? Like, let's say, I don't know, what's an idea? When grenades get dropped on the minimap, now you can kind of see that. Is that something where you go, oh, I have this idea where I want to see it on the minimap, I put it in, and like that's the whole process is owned by you? Or maybe also this also happens that someone comes to you and says, oh, what about this? Can you program that? Is that like, how does that work?
It's a bit of both. I think for like, say the games I'm not too involved with, like say PUBG Mobile, it's more of
we need this.
We'll have requests and whatnot. But Counter-Strike, it's I'm definitely one of the main people in my team who are trying to innovate the experience. So the drop grenades was probably like the first major feature that I worked on for the HUD. That was like I did so much research. It's very difficult to like get the data for these drop grenades and everything. And then I went to my boss. I'm like, oh, we can do this. I have this idea. He thought it was fantastic. So did some prototypes. Made it functional, made it work, and then we iterated it on it a bit, and now it's just like, unfortunately with a new game don't have it just yet. But yeah, definitely with CS:GO, it was definitely a loved feature.
Yeah, it was good. I liked it as a caster. For sure.
Like I remember speaking to Chad about it, and yeah, he was super happy that we added it. And for me as an in-game director, it's useful because when they drop grenades in spawn or somewhere, I can fly the camera there, show them. So these small ideas, a lot of it is in my free time. I try to think up these ideas. How can I make the experience better? And then see if it's feasible to do, but usually even if it isn't feasible, like try find a way. There's some hacky solution or whatnot. Like what's possible with technology nowadays, especially with the AI stuff. It was able to do a bit of work with that these last couple of months. So there's a lot of potential to get this additional data from the game.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a super interesting role where, like, I almost feel like it could go anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, it's not necessarily tied to Counter-Strike. It's not necessarily tied even to the game side of things. It could be, you end up doing something different in the business at some point. Who knows? Yeah.
So I think what I'm most grateful for is the fact that my boss, he gives me all the freedom in terms of learning all these new technologies, everything that's emerging, and just. I think the way that I kind of approach it is I love the learning aspect. So I liked learning the game. I like learning technology and whatnot. So I'm always thinking long term. Okay, if this esports doesn't work out, or maybe I can get a job as like a software developer or whatnot. But I'm not really focused on that. It's more just I want to do the best possible job here. So yeah, working with all these new technologies and learning is a lot of fun.
Speaking of learning, obviously there's going to be a lot of learning over the next probably 12 months or so when it comes to Counter-Strike 2 in particular. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about Counter-Strike 2. I know that you're someone that's a little bit opinionated about it. But first of all, I'll keep on the topic of your role currently and how you might have to sort of innovate things coming into Counter-Strike 2. Obviously, you'll have to do all the hard stuff and change this and that and then integration into Counter-Strike 2 compared to Go. And again, no idea how all of that works, but I'm assuming that's all going on in the background where you guys are kind of working on getting the broadcast experience in Counter-Strike 2 up to scratch with what it was in Global Offensive. But when it comes to new features, and again, we're talking, this is another good example, obviously, of when we mentioned the nade dropping thing and you had to integrate that onto the minimap. What about, things like, for example, the nading the smokes, right? How do you have you had to think about that kind of thing? How you might integrate that onto like a kill feed, for example, if it's not in the game? Is that something that you would be involved in?
Yeah, so definitely like we're in the planning stages of new HUD for next year. So all these kind of new dynamics where I'm thinking heavily about how to best visualize it, on the radar, on the kill feed, if we do some more augmented reality later down the line. So it's definitely like this new game is a couple steps backwards to then take like a bigger leap forwards in the future. So just focusing a lot on setting up a good, foundation to build upon. So yeah, definitely thinking a lot about all these new features and things that we wish we could have done in CS:GO if we had the time or the data for it or whatnot, and then with the things that we've learned along the way, trying to make the experience as good as possible for next year.
What are your thoughts on CS2 at the moment?
I think I was definitely a bit more like skeptical at the start. I wasn't too fond of the way it kind of played, but now that I've kind of learnt the game a lot more, and especially like the more tactical aspect, like playing some scrims and some pugs with the Rooster guys and whatnot, just learning the game in a more tactical aspect, I kind of appreciate it a lot more. I think it is pretty good. I still think the gunplay is take a bit more time to get there, but I don't think it's as bad as. Sorry, I mean I don't think it's that different to CS:GO.
The most recent update as well, it seemed like it was positively received, like I think it was yesterday or a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think on each update, it's just some things get patched, some things are still,
Let's get like a temperature test. Like, where are we at right now out of 10? It's like,
I mean,
granted, it's going to get improved upon, and I think that you can see that is happening.
Yeah.
But like, where do you sort of sit?
Okay, so I think from a broadcast side, the game is like super pretty to look at. So I think like the way it was viewed, it was pretty cool in IEM Sydney. Like you can do all these extra camera shots.
It looked lovely.
Yeah, it looked awesome.
I look at a Go broadcast now, I'm like, fuck, that looks ugly.
Yeah.
How did we deal with that for 10 years?
I know. Yeah,
it looks like Liazz.
So but I do think there is like when you have the better graphics, like it is a bit hard for the developers to make the game super smooth. I think it is a lot better than it was in initial stages of a beta. So yeah, I think going forward, it might take maybe about a year.
Yep.
I'd say until we kind of forget about how CS:GO felt. The game it's pretty playable. It's just some of the dynamics are a bit
still
different.
A work in progress.
Yeah, it's just the game favors wide swinging. The Pika's advantage is kind of crazy, and you need and if you're an AWPer, you can't really hold lines. You have to be more aggressive, more of like a shotgun quick scope AWPer. So I think it's just more changing the way the game is played a bit. But in general, I think if the spraying can feel a little bit better. And just kind of this response time.
I think they've changed the bullet.
Yeah,
now,
so
that it matches a bit better or something. People are saying that helped.
I think it's more just the sound is fast. It is less delayed. But in terms of registration, it's still a little bit
something
off.
to work on.
Yeah,
something to work on. Now, I want to ask you a couple of bonus questions that are not necessarily related like to specific points in your career, but just more generally about you and about observing as a craft and this kind of thing. And then we'll sort of wrap things up. So first of all, I just want to know, like, you as a person, do you think you're a little bit more resilient or you have more drive than most people? Because I feel like knowing you quite, what's the word? Like we interact quite a lot. And I know your drive and the work that you put in and how resilient you are and this kind of thing and the situations that you deal with. Do you feel like you're unique in that aspect in a way compared to other people maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all kind of stems back to when I was at high school, and like my mum pushed me to do well, and all my teachers like pushed me to do well, because they kind of like understood, I was kind of intelligent a bit, and I liked learning and stuff. So I think I'm very driven in like everything I do. Like I'm very competitive. Like I want to get the best marks. I want to do the best possible job I can. Learn as much as I can. So I think in that aspect, it's more just being able to actually be self-critical. Like there's a lot of people who they'll make some mistakes and they'll kind of shy away from it, and like whereas being able to like review your work, understand, oh, okay, I could have done this a bit better, and grow, and I think it all translates to the playing. Like the only way to improve at the game is understanding mistakes, and improving upon them. So just taking a rational approach in that aspect, I think I'm pretty driven.
Has there been anyone that you've looked up to or that sort of helped you along your journey in particular that you think is like, someone like when you first started observing or when you first started kind of working in esports, was there anyone there that you kind of looked to?
I think
so to speak?
I think when I went to China for the first time, and I was working with Rush, I think that was a big moment because he was super friendly, super welcoming, like, and he was like the first like observer that I spoke to like at like a super deep level about the game, and how to approach situations, how to approach the pressure, and how to kind of have fun with it. So like I had a lot of admiration for his work, working all the big events. So I think him in particular, but I think just everyone at work being super supportive, is like has helped a lot. I think it's because I'm a bit of an introvert, a bit quiet, but like people like Carmack, who's super supportive of my work and stuff. He kind of like likes to give us a bit of a spotlight every now and then. So just trying to be a bit more open to putting myself out there, and being confident in the work and talking to people.
When it comes to CS:GO observing, and the way that we look at the game currently, is there anything that you've done that you think has innovated the way that observing plays out? Right, anything that we take for granted now that maybe you can say, I kind of did that.
I think the biggest thing is defining the role of the in-game director. So previously it was just you just do spawn cinematics and then cut to the main observer and that's it, and then you might show the bomb explosion, whereas now I fly the camera, like we have a nice smooth free cam that the HLE guys made, so being able to do a lot of free cam mid-round, I think, is super crucial to the broadcast. So being able to catch all these grenades,
grenade misses, the window smoke.
Yes, like the misses, all the HE grenades that hit and do a lot of damage, rotations. There's some situations where like players don't see each other and they walk past each other. But I think just in general, just being able to make the round flow is super important. With how all the utility plays out, I think before I started doing the free cam, the viewing experience was I think it's like a bit more difficult for a general viewer, and then also like a more advanced viewer won't be able to get as much out of it, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's fair. For people who want to be observers or who currently are, how do they improve? Where do they get feedback, or what's a good way of like going about getting better, basically?
So I mean, I've had a few like up and coming observers message me, and so what I'd say is, whenever there's these like open qualifiers where there's like an open GoTV and whatnot, stream them or just record yourself observing, even if it's just like on a demo, and send it to like me or Rush or any of us observers, and we can critique it and provide some feedback. But also, it's just I feel like a big part of it is just doing a little bit of prep work at the beginning, like kind of seeing if you like observing, and then improving it as much as you can, just starting off with just like whatever demos you can get, and then whenever there is an opportunity, because there's always these qualifiers and whatnot where we need observers, and just being a bit more known, like putting your name out there a bit. All you need is just one event to be asked for, and then it can kind of flourish from there.
Yep.
I'd say.
Who leads the broadcast, observers or casters?
I think it's pretty 50-50. Yeah, so I think in particular, like working with like Chad and Alex, they're probably like one of my favorite caster duos to work with. And they're pretty direct with, what kind of storylines they're focusing on with the certain players and whatnot. So we kind of follow that. But then when the rounds get complicated, and I don't know if there's like a missed smoke or there's something that's a bit different, like they're playing a variation of a setup, being able to highlight it and then have Chad like instantly recognize what I'm trying to show, it's super valuable. So I think it is pretty 50. We put words in their mouths and they kind of tell us what to focus on.
See.
Yeah. So but yeah, I think the relationship's rigged.
I mean, on that topic, obviously, I wanted to talk to you about the synergy with casters. Like, is that a thing that you can develop? Because, like, when we're talking about caster pairings and this and that, like, obviously, we talk about the synergy between casters and how they work as a team and that kind of thing. But maybe one of the under-recognized parts of that is that oftentimes you will be working with the same observer in a lot of cases, right? So do you, do you as an observer or as someone who's involved in that in-game directing get used to certain casters, certain duos? Obviously you said you really like working with Sponge and Machine. Are they your favorite pair to work with? Like, do you have a favorite pair? Is that even a thing? Do you know what I mean?
I think it's more just different caster pairings have different styles. So with Chad and Alex, I mean, for me as like a more tactical background, I enjoy working with them a lot because I can highlight all these small things that are happening around the map, and Chad will kind of pick up on it, or Alex will ask Chad a question about it. Whereas, but I also love working with, say, Harry and Hugo. I think they're awesome to work with. But it's just, I think it's more about understanding how their sentences kind of flow. So understanding, okay, maybe I don't cut as often, and I can kind of predict when they're going to finish talking about a point. So then that's when I cut to what's happening on the other side of the map. But yeah, like I think casters like Harry and Hugo, they're much more focused on the storyline of each individual player, and all these up and comers, and I think they do a really good job with that. So in that aspect, sometimes we'll do a bit more focus on the first person aspect with those kind of players, but yeah, no, I think just every caster pairing is different. So just understanding what works best with working with each set of casters.
I mean, it's interesting that I never really thought about that being a thing necessarily until I was like preparing for this conversation, and I can see it obviously makes quite a big difference actually based on which caster is casting the game. Did you have a favorite series that you've observed?
Favorite series? I mean, I'd say it would have been the Renegades Mousesports. But I think in my current role,
I mean, also just that you've been involved in, not necessarily that you directly observed.
I mean, I think the last IEM Sydney was like the most special event ever for me. Just kind of coming into the event with the increased responsibility and like in my new role that I kind of helped define. And I think we had a lot of fantastic games at that event. So yeah, I think that would probably be like the most special one for me. But I mean, just looking back on it, like I always miss casting with observing, the games that you're casting with like Pilly and Mac and all of them. Like even at the Australian office, like we had so many fun games doing these Asian teams. Yeah, but a lot of them were like unique, Counter-Strike, like super aggressive. So I think that was always super fun.
So one thing that you've told me in the past in your role is that you have the power over the X-ray into the arena.
Oh.
So how do you feel about that kind of responsibility? And did you ever have to invoke it in Sydney? Because for IEM Sydney 23, because I was sitting in the crowd a couple of times and I noticed the X-ray turned off in a couple of instances. So was that you?
Yes, yeah. So that was me. But okay, so we've done it for like the last couple of years now.
Yeah.
And it's more so we do it as like a preventative measure. So in terms of responsibility, I'm fine with it. It's just an extra thing to kind of think about during the playoffs. But I feel like you have to have a high level game knowledge to be able to do it. So the kind of idea behind it is to preserve the purity of the round. When players are doing flanks and whatnot. So yeah, so I was toggling on and off every now and then. Just try not to do it too much, but in certain situations it is necessary. Otherwise, it could change the round.
Yep.
If a crowd reacts a certain way.
Yep. Did you ever want to be broadcast talent? You ever think about being a caster or an analyst?
Nah, I think I'm a bit too quiet in that aspect. But I've always wanted to come on the ANZ Champs show. Like as a guest or whatever.
Never gonna happen, mate.
Never happened. I think the times we wanted to do it, I was like working so much, and it's just never had the brain power to kind of be in the mindset for it.
I'm going to be honest though. I think you're someone that kind of needs to be pushed to go out of your comfort zone a little bit. Like even with this, for the context, I've been trying to do this interview with you for like 3 years.
Yep.
I went back and when you finally agreed again to do it, I had to like update the doc because like I had it until I think it was just before COVID. Like it was before COVID that we were initially planning to do this, and it was like maybe even before you even started working properly at ESL Global. And I was like, man, it's been 3 years since I first asked you to do this, and so it's like over that period I might have asked you like maybe once or twice. Until recently, again over the last couple of months, it's been like let's actually do it. And obviously now you're doing it. But I wonder if like if we would have pushed you more and said like come on, really just do one day, you reckon you would have done it? And do you reckon you would have like, because now having had this conversation with you, like I feel like you've done fine, like you know what I mean, like you've handled it pretty okay. So you could have handled a broadcast, like it's the same thing. So you reckon you could have like in a different world maybe just ended up doing a little bit of broadcast stuff back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I had similar kind of...
You have the knowledge, you have the thing is like as well, by the way, when we're talking off camera, off broadcast, like when we're just like hanging out, playing CS, watching CS, whatever, I listen to what you say, I'm like, you could literally just say that on a show and it would be like, fine. You know what I mean? Like, so...
Yeah, I think if like once I overcome kind of the whole like aspect that you're on camera and stuff like that, and I just if I were to be able to just focus on talking about the game, like I got I came from like I got a similar viewpoint to say Pilly. I remember when he first started, it took him a bit of time to kind of get over the nerves and stuff. But yeah, I think I probably if you push me a little bit more and I did like one day, I probably could have kept going. But I think it's more just need enough time to devote to doing a good job.
It's a different role,
it's
obviously,
different,
but I think you have the skill set.
Yeah. Okay.
Or the ability. Maybe not the skill set, but the ability to have the skill set and to say what you need to say. I wonder though, you're only 25, right? Or you're about to be 25. Yeah. By the way, is it Saturday or Sunday your birthday?
Sunday.
So this will probably go out on Sunday, by the way. Okay. So happy birthday, MC, on Sunday. Everyone in the YouTube comments can let MC know to have a happy birthday this afternoon. So I do almost wonder, right? You're 25 when this comes out, still pretty young, right? There could be a world when you do a Yanko, go from observing or from production to being on deck. Never know. 5 years down the track, could happen.
Definitely could happen. Yep.
ESL. Get them in. All right. Well, final thing then to wrap it up. I mean, what's the end goal? What is the end goal for you with this career? Is there end goal even in your mind at the moment? Like, are you Have you thought about that, or is it just keep doing it?
I just I think with the CS2, it's a new opportunity, so kind of want to just go all out, do a really good job with it in these next couple of years, and then kind of see where the landscape is at. I'd love to continue, in this kind of role and at ESL, for as long as possible. But like I wouldn't mind like if in the future I moved into more of like a IT software development role or whatnot. But yeah, no, I'm loving the work at the moment. Want to keep on grinding. The new game's pretty exciting to work on. So yeah, want to see where we get to.
Hey guys, just at the end of this video, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Jean, who is my first supporter on buymeacoffee.com. If you'd also like to support me financially or any of my content, make sure to check out the link. It is in the description box below.